Hi there and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Kapelos in Ottawa on this Tuesday. Tonight, Trump's push for Venezuelan oil ignites Canadian pipeline politics.
We welcome the prospect of greater prosperity in Venezuela, but we also see the competitiveness of Canadian oil.
The U.S. push to move big American oil companies into Venezuela sparks national debate on pipeline prospects here at home. We're going to break down the market reaction with CTV's chief financial correspondent Amanda Lang in moments. Then we'll dig into the political stakes with our front bench. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Stephanie Levitz will all be here. We'll also talk about what's next for Venezuela.
It was so complex. 152 airplanes, many. Talk about boots on the ground. We had a lot of boots on the ground.
A key Venezuelan opposition figure, Orlando Vieira Blanco, has been living for years in exile here in Canada. He'll join us on this program coming up. Plus, America eyes Greenland.
Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland.
After going into Venezuela, the Trump administration insists Denmark isn't prepared to defend Greenland. Comments that spark Canadian and European response on the sidelines of Ukraine peace talks. We're going to bring you the latest from Paris on that a little bit later on in the show. First, though.
It's been our view, and we're working towards this, that Canadian oil will be competitive because it is low risk, clearly low risk. Low cost, the marginal costs, there's been huge progress in getting down the costs, and low carbon, which is what the Pathways project, carbon capture, will bring. And that makes Canadian oil competitive for the medium and long term.
Prime Minister Mark Carney responding from Paris to concern that U.S. access to oil-rich Venezuela could hit Canada's energy industry, insisting, as you heard there, our industry remains competitive. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre had earlier written a letter to the Prime Minister calling on him to approve a pipeline in the wake of events in Venezuela. Poilievre later responded to the comments you just heard from the Prime Minister, writing in part, Canadians deserve the truth. Venezuela's return to global oil markets is a specific threat to Canadian oil sands petroleum in a way that Saudi oil or other light crudes are not, and we can't afford to delay any action that will protect our sovereignty and give us new customers to sell it to, especially a pipeline to the Pacific coast. After a rough day for Canadian oil stocks, Monday markets were a little more mixed today, with some key stocks seeing recovery. With us now to unpack some of that is CTV News' chief financial correspondent, Amanda Lang. Hi, Amanda. Happy New Year. Good to see you today. Thanks very much for making the time. Oh, sort of see you. Something's going on in the computer, so hopefully they'll be able to fix that. I think that you can hear me, so I'm gonna start just by asking. Okay, great. I'm going to start by asking the question, and hopefully in the meantime, the the control room can fix what's going on there. We heard from the Prime Minister his view on essentially what more U.S. access, if that should come to fruition in Venezuela, would mean for the Canadian oil patch. We also heard from Pierre Poilievre, who seemed to talk, be invoking there the fact that they have heavy crude and we have heavy crude. What is your view on, what are the markets telling us? What do you think about the potential impact of what is going on in Venezuela, or the potential for more oil in Venezuela getting out of the ground for the Canadian sector?
I think the markets are unlikely to have really been reacting directly to the Venezuela situation where oil prices are concerned, Vassy, because it will take a long time to stabilize those markets, to make the investments required to get that oil to market. So could there be long-term implications? Yes. Would that have affected oil prices and stocks this week? Less likely. What we have seen are a host of new forecasts for oil prices in the next year to 3 years, and the supply and demand picture. And that is what has been depressing the price of oil. And so we've seen these forecasts that keep the price of oil anywhere from $58 a barrel to the mid-60s. You just heard from the Prime Minister, our Canadian oil producers have managed to get their break-even costs down. They'll still make money at those levels, but it is not a scenario where excess demand is driving this. It's excess supply. So it's an interesting aspect of this, actually, because we saw this renewed debate of let's get our oil to market, let's get that additional pipeline built. That would actually send the price of oil even lower. Having said that, we want to, of course, take the market share where we can. The scenario, though, as we look out in the years ahead, is that the world has more oil than it needs, and that's likely to continue for a long time.
Do you think that's the case? I mean, I take your point on that. I certainly have heard, I guess, from previous pipeline proponents like the individual, for example, who used to run Kinder Morgan, that essentially, like you said, the markets will determine whether that capacity exists. And right now, for the next 5 years, maybe 10 years, we have what is necessary, what the markets are demanding. But there could be additional demand beyond that. I know the Energy Agency now forecasts more growth in the demand for oil than it did, let's say, a few years ago. How do you think that might factor into it? Particularly because, as you mentioned, like the political nexus is around the prospect of this new pipeline, should one ever actually be proposed.
The longer term prospect for fossil fuels is as much your guess as mine, and your next panel has a better shot at answering that than I do. It's a political question. There is enough oil in the world to continue to fuel us for many, many generations. If we want to do that, we may find that as new technologies come online and are perfected and are cheapened, that we shift away from fossil fuels. I've seen some of the same kind of forecasts you've seen, which is that the timeline for that has been extended. That would really play into the argument of Canada has this resource. There's a market for it today. Get it to market today and get as much of it to market today. We're making buggy whips here. At some point, we'll likely move away from that. Now, will that be 100 years, be 10 years? Again, your guess is as good as mine. So get the markets functioning while they can. But every time we do that, of course, we put more oil on the global market. So in the current environment, that means we will depress the supply. We will make less per barrel as we ship new barrels. That's just the nature of a supply and demand market. So unless something massively changes on the demand side, we're likely looking at a oil price that'll stay a little range bound. I mean, again, some Canadian producers can produce at $18 a barrel. They're fine with a $60 barrel of oil. I can tell you the government of Alberta doesn't love $60 a barrel. It would like to see $70 a barrel. Canadian consumers have a sweet spot. We want oil to be low enough to keep our costs down, but high enough that our economy does well, that our exports are solid, and that government revenues are strong. And the estimates put that number somewhere in the high 60s. So the estimates I've seen from the IEA and from Deloitte this week are lower than that. That's bad for the Canadian economy. So that's where I'm kind of focused, less on Venezuela, more on the fact that currently the supply demand picture doesn't favor us, even though we'll still see oil producers making money.
You mentioned the politics. There's even more politics associated with the way in which all this unfolded and the prospect of, for example, Greenland or a whole bunch of other things. I just wonder, is there any early impact economically? Anything further destabilizing, or have things kind of built in the unpredictability of the U.S. leadership?
I think that you really nailed it there. These are the kinds of events that in another time and place, when you and I have both been alive and reporting on these things, would have had a shocking impact on markets, on U.S. treasuries, on all kinds of destabilizing aspects. I think the markets have taken it in stride because we have become accustomed to the unknown. And I would even say, you could literally see a takeover of Greenland and say the U.S. economy will keep ticking on and people will carry on. And that's a shocking thing to say out loud. But I think we have become used to the uncertainty now. Businesses aren't used to it. I will say this. The one thing and this is true of the oil price, it's true of understanding what the path is in a place like Venezuela. Businesses like to know what's happening beyond the next 3 months. It makes them very hard for them to make investment decisions. We have seen business investment down in this country for sure. So the uncertainty around trade is playing out in that way. And that's a pain point because an investment that isn't made today costs us for not just months, but years. And so that uncertainty is where it plays. It's not an immediate reaction in the market. It's a longer term loss of confidence, loss of investment that we pay for a while.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Amanda, pleasure as always. Appreciate your insights. Thank you.
Great to talk.
Amanda Lang is CTV's chief financial correspondent. Meanwhile, BC's Premier David Eby is maintaining his opposition to any new, though not officially yet proposed, pipeline to the northwest coast, of his province. Take a listen.
We're happy to work with Alberta and the federal government on ensuring access to tidewater. But what I don't support, is taxpayers paying for another publicly owned pipeline across the north. If we're going to do public investment into our resources here in Canada, I think it might be time to pivot that discussion to a refinery We still buy oil products from the United States. I don't understand why.
We're going to dig into the domestic political side of all of that just a little bit later on in the show with our front bench. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Stephanie Levitz will all be here. First, though, Donald Trump is digging in on Venezuela.
It was so complex. 152 airplanes, many. Talk about boots on the ground. We had a lot of boots on the ground. But it was amazing. And think of it, nobody was killed. And on the other side, a lot of people were killed. Unfortunately, I say that, soldiers. Cubans, mostly Cubans, but many killed. And they knew we were coming. You know, he's a violent guy. He gets up there and he tries to imitate my dance a little bit. But he's a violent guy.
So what does happen next in Venezuela? Maduro's former second in command was sworn in as the country's interim president, backed, at least for now, by the Americans. But exiled opposition politician Maria Corina Machado says she's ready to come home and believes her party is also ready for a democratic election.
Well, first of all, I'm planning to go back to Venezuela as soon as possible. As I've always said, Sean, every day I make a decision where I am more useful for a cause. That's why I stayed in hiding for over 16 months, and that's why I decided to go out, because I believed that at this moment I'm more useful to our cause, being able to speak out from where I am right now. But I'm planning to go as soon as possible back home.
Joining us now on what could be next for Venezuela is Orlando Vieira Blanco. Mr. Vieira Blanco was an ambassador to Canada on behalf of the Venezuelan opposition, but recognized in 2019 officially as the ambassador by Canada because Maduro seized power fraudulently. Despite international support back then, the opposition was unable to unseat Maduro, and Orlando Vieira Blanco, has been living in Canada in exile ever since. Hi, Mr. Vieira Blanco. Pleasure to welcome you to our program. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you for having me.
What was going through your head in the early morning, or the early hours, I should say, of Saturday as you watched the news about Maduro's capture surface?
Literally, it was some kind of light in the middle of the dark. My first feeling is a feeling of hope, and it's a feeling with accumulation, a lot of suffering and pain in my country, with the hope that it's done and we finally going to start with a transition from the darkness, from the dictatorship, from the criminal state to democracy.
He had been in power, I guess you could say, though not by any legitimate means, for a long time. I am wondering if you had given up hope.
Yes, I'm going to say that for more than 27 years, and furthermore, in the last 7 years or 10 years of Maduro, we had lived in a situation in Venezuela that they stole the election in 2024. They just assumed the power on their illegal basis and an unconstitutional basis. It's a very non-precedent situation in Latin America. You never have seen in the history of the hemisphere a situation in which a country had been kidnapped by the state on their criminal basis. So we have seen something which is very demanding, and we really have a high expectation to move forward with prudency, with a transition that is going to be complicated, but at the end is going to be the end of the worst government and dictatorship that we have seen in Latin America.
What do you think are the key ingredients for that transition to be successful?
We need to achieve some stabilization goal. We need to see some kind of change in the dynamic of violation of human rights. We need to see security in Venezuela, but we need protection by the Venezuelan citizen. We need the release of the political prisoner. We need to vindicate the civil rights, the political rights, the human rights, and by the way, it is the voice from Canada as a champion in human rights that we really need in this moment. Sustainable transition, a peaceful transition, an ordered transition means the restoration of the state of the rights. And we need the urgency, freedom of the political prisoner, and guarantees of protection of no more persecution against the innocent Venezuelan people.
What is your level of confidence that what you have just laid out will occur? And I completely understand the reason for hope, and I can't imagine what you and your fellow citizens have endured. But I listen very carefully to what Donald Trump is saying, the kinds of actions that he's pursuing, the way that he talks about oil, for example, the way he doesn't talk about freeing political prisoners. And I am left wondering if what you just laid out will actually come to fruition. Are you worried about that?
I'm worried about that, not to confuse the real meaning of the liberalization process in Venezuela. You can hear a lot about talking about oil, talking about economic issues, talking about any kind of advantage that you can take about the potentiality of Venezuela to move forward and to be successfully in the transition process. But economic issue is not the key issue. The key issue is about rights. The key issue is about human being. And I have very confidence that it is in a situation that demands a lot of strategy, that demands a lot of planification and a lot of measure to stabilize the country. It's not a diplomatic issue, by the way. It's an enforcement issue. Again, I want to remark, never in the history of the hemisphere, and even maybe in the history of the world, you have seen a situation like this in Venezuela. I'm talking with you, and I can tell you, just myself, I have like 2,000 complaints and denounced in the International Criminal Court. We need the voice of Canada in order to impulse and move forward with the justice in the International Criminal Court. We need that Canada join with the Trump administration in the United States in order to give protection of the Venezuelan citizen in the process of restoration of the economy and the institution and the state. We need the voice of Canada in order to demand protection of human rights and non-violation of the civil and political rights. Just yesterday, it was arresting and imprisoning 15 journalists in Venezuela. We need the voice of the world to get involved with the White House in the process of the transition process in Venezuela, not just because we have oil, not just because we have resources, mineral, rare earth, or whatever. It's because we need to get back home, and we need to get home peacefully and with the full restoration of the civil, political, and human rights.
Do you think countries like Canada can exert enough pressure, for example, on the White House, that when you talk about the imprisonment, right? I mean, the president right now was Maduro's vice president. I think that's why there's concern that this is not going to be the kind of transition that you hope it is. Do you think Canada can exert that kind of pressure on the White House to ensure the transition looks the way that I completely understand you say it should?
Absolutely. Canada, I have to remember and I have to recognize at the time that I was ambassador from the interim government to Canada, I received a lot of support from Canada as a voice in the protection and human rights in the United Nations. I received full support from Canada to make the referral against Maduro in the International Criminal Court. We received a lot of support from Canada who promote the installation of the fact-finding mission in the United Nations. Canada is a champion in human rights, and that is a good issue to try to give campaigning with Trump administration in order to move forward. This is a good issue, by the way, to create bridge between Canada and United States. I know that the speech sometimes, the message from Mr. Donald Trump could be rude and could be so pragmatic, but that's the function, that's the real participation of the champion of human rights like Canada. So I'm pretty sure that we have an issue in which Canada and United States and the rest of the world could participate in the complicated transition, which means justice, which means peace, which means again restoration of a country with a lot of resources to achieve the Venezuelan miracle.
One final question for you, sir, if you don't mind. You've been forced to live in exile here in Canada. Do you hope to return one day to Venezuela?
Absolutely. I'm very excited to have the expectation to get back to Venezuela. I became Canadian as well. I'm very proud to be a Canadian as well. We have a lot of aspects, a lot of values, a lot of things that we had learned in Canada, and we could serve as a bridge as well to bring it up so many Canadian investors and a good example to my country, and again to achieve that I like to call the big rebound, the miracle rebound that you never see in Latin America because the potentiality that we have in our country.
I will leave it on that note. Thank you so much, Mr. Vieira Blanco. I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening, and thank you for having me. Good night.
It's Orlando Vieira Blanco. Coming up, we're going to head overseas where world leaders, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, gathered and agreed to security guarantees for Ukraine. Our senior political correspondent, Mike Couture, will join us with his report from Paris after a short break. Back in a moment.
The real question is, by what right does Denmark assert control over Greenland? What is the basis of their territorial claim? What is their basis of having Greenland as a colony of Denmark? The United States is the power of NATO. For the United States to secure the Arctic region, to protect and defend NATO and NATO interests, obviously Greenland should be part of the United States. There's no need to even think or talk about this in the context that you're asking of a military operation. Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland.
That is one of Donald Trump's top aides, Stephen Miller, ramping up, to put it mildly, White House rhetoric targeting Greenland, which Donald Trump claims Denmark is not equipped to defend. Prime Minister Mark Carney was asked to respond to those comments in Paris on the sidelines of Ukraine peace talks with the coalition of the willing.
The future of Greenland is a decision for Greenland and for Denmark exclusively. It's their decision. Secondly, from a NATO context, the way I would frame it is that the western flank of NATO, which would include Greenland, the Arctic, is, given the evolving threat environment, is an area that we as NATO, Canada obviously importantly, given our geography, need to invest more in. And with our buildup, that's just beginning of our military capabilities, we are making heavy investments in the Arctic.
Other world leaders were asked about Greenland as well, but the meeting was supposed to focus on Ukraine. So what came of those talks? CTV's senior political correspondent, Mike Couture, is traveling with the Prime Minister.
Well, Vashi, this meeting brought together more than 30 world leaders who make up the coalition of the willing. Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, came into this looking for security guarantees, and Prime Minister Mark Carney believed that there was momentum and that they would be able to secure some of those. Now, in the last few hours here, we have heard what they've agreed to, and they put out this joint statement. There are 5 parts to it. The first is that they agreed to participate in a U.S.-led ceasefire monitoring and verification mechanism. The long-term support also agreed to for Ukraine's armed forces, plus a multinational force to backstop Ukraine's military. Canada could make up a part of that, and we'll come back to that in a moment. There's also an agreement to finalizing binding commitments to support Ukraine in the event that Russia does violate a potential ceasefire whenever that is signed. And countries also agreed to deepen the long-term defense cooperation with Ukraine's military. Now, Zelensky came into this hoping for some sort of a NATO-style coalition where an attack on one would be an attack on all. It's unclear if what is announced today is something that would meet that, but clearly the mechanism is there because, but clearly it was good enough, I should say, because Zelensky did agree to it. Now, Canada has said it will contribute to that multinational force, meaning boots on the ground. Prime Minister Mark Carney wasn't able to say how many, but he did say that Canada continues to ramp up spending in its military, and said that you could also redeploy some resources from other missions to help meet that need. Now, the threats against Greenland did hang over these meetings, and notably the bilateral meeting that Prime Minister Mark Carney had with his Danish counterpart. He did say that Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand will be traveling to Greenland, as would be Governor General Mary Simon. But he did also underscore and reiterate that the future of Greenland will be up to the people of Greenland and Denmark and no one else. And that comes as U.S. President Donald Trump continues to threaten that territory, which is under Danish control, and saying that he needs to have it. Now, regardless of the results today of these meetings and the resolutions that came out for Ukraine, Prime Minister Mark Carney reiterated that none of this can go forward without a ceasefire. And he said those negotiations still have to take place between the U.S., Ukraine, and Russia. Vashi?
All right, that's Mike LeCouture for us reporting in Paris. Thanks so much, Mike. I do want to share with you some developing news coming from the federal government. We've just got into our mailboxes a brand new statement from Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand on the situation in Venezuela. She did issue a statement Saturday afternoon after everything that had occurred there, but this is the first that we've heard from her since. And I'm going to read what I view as the most significant part of the statement, which is the second half, where she says that she has just concluded a meeting with her G7 foreign minister colleagues. She writes that we heard from Secretary Rubio, referencing Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State in the White House administration, on the importance of freeing political prisoners, putting in place conditions for a functioning democracy, and planning for elections with a legitimate president chosen by the Venezuelan people in the future. She writes, we agreed as a group to continue the dialogue about the importance of international law and other global conflicts, including security guarantees to support Ukraine's sovereign future. I picked that part as the most significant because none of that has been explicit from the comments we have heard publicly through President Trump. He has not talked about, for example, freeing political prisoners, a move to a functioning democracy, how that might take place, or whether or not there would be elections held anytime soon. Marco Rubio has made different comments at times, but ultimately Donald Trump has not. So it is interesting that the perception of Canada's foreign affairs minister is that is at least somewhere on the agenda as far as her counterpart and the United States Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is concerned. If there's anything more that comes from that statement, we will, of course, share it with you. We're going to take a quick commercial break. On the other end of that break, though, the front bench will be here to talk about other news out of what's going on in Venezuela, specifically what it means for domestic pipeline politics in the oil sector. Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Monk, and Stephanie Levitz. There they all are. They're back with us in just 2 minutes. Stay right there.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. It won't cost us anything because the money coming out of the ground is very substantial. We're going to be taking out a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground.
That was U.S. President Donald Trump in his first comments after the capture of Venezuelan dictator Nicolas Maduro, claiming, as you heard, the U.S. would run the country and insisting it won't cost Americans anything because of all the oil profits he says will come from U.S. companies moving into Venezuela. That claim is something that has sparked concern for Canada's energy industry. But Prime Minister Mark Carney insists this country remains competitive.
It's been our view, and we're working towards this, that Canadian oil will be competitive because it is low risk, clearly low risk, low cost, the marginal costs. There's been huge progress in getting down the costs, and low carbon, which is what the Pathways project, carbon capture, will bring. And that makes Canadian oil competitive for the medium and long term.
Despite Carney's confidence, both Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre and Alberta Premier Danielle Smith are pushing for a new pipeline to get Alberta bitumen to Pacific Tidewater and to do so fast, something BC's Premier David Eby continues to reject. I don't know where, maybe that clip is coming, but you heard it earlier in the show. He definitely does reject it. That's basically what Pierre Poilievre has said in a statement that followed those comments from the Prime Minister. We're going to bring in the front bench right now to talk a little bit about how this is affecting domestic politics around this issue. Joining us tonight, senior advisor, to the Liberal Ontario governments of Dalton McGuinty and Kathleen Wynne, Dan Moulton. He's now a partner with Crestview Strategy. Next to him, that's Shakir Chambers. He worked in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office before becoming a policy advisor to the International Trade Minister. Kathleen Monk is here in studio. She's former director of communications to the late Jack Layton, now the principal owner of Monk & Associates. And next to her, Stephanie Levitz is a senior reporter in the Globe and Mail's Parliament Hill Bureau. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Nice to see you. I promise we will have that clip, I believe, from David Eby in a moment. But in the lead up to it all, and we explained this a bit earlier, Stephanie, there was a letter that came out last night from Pierre Poilievre basically saying, you got to approve a pipeline fast given this uncertainty. I thought what was very interesting in the way that the Prime Minister responded today was there was so much less daylight between their positions in the aggregate than there might have been a few years ago between a Liberal Prime Minister and the Conservative leader. There's not, the details are not exactly the same, but both are saying, we got to do more of that in light of this, basically.
Isn't that one of Pierre Poilievre's greatest frustrations, right? Is to see the thing that he has advocated for and championed for so long now being taken up by a sitting Liberal Prime Minister. Right. And it makes it challenging for Mr. Poilievre again and again to carve out his space. So now he moves into a different space, which is hold Mr. Carney accountable, right? And say, hey, Prime Minister, you promised you were going to do this. You said you were going to do it. We need to do it fast. Do it faster. I'm not sure that's feasible. I mean, we don't still have a proponent, as far as I know, for said pipeline. But obviously they're moving in the same direction. The question is whether Mr. Carney can deliver now on that thing he says he wants to do.
Yeah, the question of delivery, I think, is where the space for that side of the opposition lies. There's another opposition, Kathleen, as you will well know, with you Democrats who take a different view. At the provincial level, we do have that clip from Premier Eby, so I'm just going to play it and then I'll get your reaction.
We're happy to work with Alberta and the federal government on ensuring access to Tidewater. But what we don't support, what I don't support, is taxpayers paying for another publicly owned pipeline across the north. If we're going to do public investment into our resources here in Canada, I think it might be time to pivot that discussion to a refinery. We still buy oil products from the United States. I don't understand why.
So he had lightly intimated the refinery stuff before, and New Democrats provincially in Alberta had talked about that a lot. Not a whole lot of change in his position. What do you make of how that might unfold?
Well, it might not come as no surprise to you, but once again, I think that Premier Eby is the most sane person in terms of when we're talking about these issues. He's rational, he's pragmatic. He's saying, don't call for a pipeline that has, as Steph says, no proponent, no backing in terms of financial money, and frankly, isn't necessary right now. So I think Eby was, calm, cool, and collected today. Once again, reiterating he's happy to kind of help Alberta, expand the capacity of the existing pipeline, but also talking about a sensible thing like possibly developing developing some refineries and expanding refinery capacity. My great-grandfather worked in the Montreal refineries for Petrofina many years ago. Those are good jobs. We can actually refine some of this oil here. And if the question or the panic that is currently gripping some folks in Canada right now is the fact that our oil, our heavy oil, is similar to Venezuela, and now we're going to be in competition with Venezuela in terms of getting our oil processed through those American refineries, well then, hey, why not actually refine some of it here? I mean,
because it's so much more expensive.
It is so much more expensive. But the reality is that, I mean, we could actually do more value-added processing to all of our natural resources, not just oil, but, you know, lumber, you name it, to steel manufacturing. We've seen how we've been hamstrung, frankly, by the fact that even though we have a steel industry here, we actually don't manufacture and do those value-added jobs in the same way, and we export our raw resources to some extent to other countries as opposed to doing that processing and value-added work here.
Yeah, I think that definitely exemplifies sort of the different lines of argument around this. It's just, again, unique, Dan, that I think like there is less space between what you're hearing from conservatives and liberals at this moment in time. And it feels as though, particularly for the liberals, and I don't mean this as a crass a way as it sounds, but what is going on in Venezuela, the potential of more competition from there, almost provides a little bit more political coverage to take a position that would not have been as salient for them, you know, as recently as a year ago.
Absolutely. What's happening in Venezuela underscores, I think, everything the Prime Minister has been doing since he was elected to get more of our energy resources developed, to work with the provincial governments to accomplish that goal. I think the political reality here is, as has been discussed, most challenging for Pierre Poilievre. This issue has been taken off the table for him. He is, through his comments last night and today on getting a pipeline approved that doesn't have a proponent, he's trying to play his way into the story because it's the only way he can get any attention right now. I think a lot of political advisors to the leader of the opposition would probably be saying, affordability is the issue we win on right now. Canadians have just spent the last few weeks spending tons of money at shopping malls and grocery stores. They're looking at their credit card bills and they're feeling anxious about affordability. But Pierre Poilievre could have started the new year with a real focus on that issue. And I think it would have landed like a tree in the woods, right? I don't think there would have been any attention on it. We wouldn't be talking about it tonight. And so I do think it was smart of the Conservatives to try and deal themselves into the story that we would be focused on today and that Canadians would be, the news media and Canadians would be paying a lot of attention to. The trouble is there's just no room for them in this, right? Like as you point out, there's no daylight really between the two positions. I don't think the Conservatives are going to move many votes on it. It's just this sort of attempt to get into the news and get some attention on their argument here.
The only chance I see for there to be more daylight is on what sort of Steph and Kathleen referenced, Shakir, which is like execution, right? Because eventually there isn't a private proponent, but there is a proposition coming in July, apparently, according to the pipeline's new website, which has just gone up on the Alberta government's page. Like there will be some sort of submission made and ultimately a decision, I think, will have to be made in one way or the other. The Prime Minister will have to be more unequivocal about his position on the prospect of that pipeline. That's not in the near term. Like, that's not in the next few weeks. Like I said, even Alberta has set out a timeline for that submission, not until the summer. Maybe they're playing the long game around that, but it still is very different than what you would expect, for example, if you put that letter out last night to Justin Trudeau, what Trudeau would have said in response.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's not a lot of wiggle room here for Pierre to kind of attack Carney on this issue, but I think you and Stephanie have it right. It's about the accountability and making sure this government executes. I know they like to call themselves Canada's new government, but I mean, listen, under Trudeau, they were very good at making announcements, very good at signing things, very bad at implementation and execution. Mark Carney has said a lot of great things, and hopefully he can deliver, but right now he's not really delivering on a lot of things. So I think for Pierre Poilievre, the thing here right now is make sure that whatever Carney says he's going to do, an MOU is nice to see, but are you actually going to move forward? If we get a private proponent, are you actually going to go to David Eby and say, you know what, this is going to move forward regardless of your opposition? I think that's where Pierre is trying to find some daylight, ensuring that things do get done. Because again, Carney came to power saying we're going to build things at speeds unimaginable. So let's get this done, right? Let's move this forward. And I think Pierre, he understands this is a conservative issue that Carney has taken a hold of, but the one thing he can do is ensure this gets executed properly and gets delivered to the people of Alberta and to Canada at large.
Okay, I got to take another quick break, but we've got a lot more to talk about, including Chrystia Freeland, floor crossings, by-elections, lots coming up. We're back with the front bench in just a few minutes.
Did you ask her not to quit because of the minority parliament situation right now?
No, absolutely not. I had her as my special envoy after she left cabinet for the Ukraine reconstruction. Judgment became her judgment that she could be more useful for that process as she was leaving, as she was retiring as a parliamentarian, as a direct advisor. My judgment was that taking that role would be consistent with resigning as an MP, and I welcomed her doing that. And there'll be a few by-elections coming up, and we'll run great candidates, and the people in those ridings will decide who they want to send to Parliament.
Prime Minister Mark Carney there commenting on Chrystia Freeland's decision to step down as an MP in the, quote, coming weeks after she accepted a new role to advise Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Freeland had previously said she would not run in the next election, but her announcement to eventually resign while advising a foreign government continues to be scrutinized. Carney, as you heard in that clip, also said he did not ask Freeland to stay on, despite the Liberals being only a seat away from a majority. Let's bring back our front bench, Dan Moulton, Shakir Chambers, Kathleen Munkin, Stephanie Levitz, to talk about that. Dan, I'll start with you on this one. What do you think is really happening here? It is surprising to me, just given Ms. Freeland's extensive experience, that it wouldn't have been obvious from a perception perspective that felt weird not to resign right away.
Well, I mean, look, the first week of January 2026 has put a pretty high bar on most surprising development. I don't think there's a lot surprising about what has happened here. Chrystia Freeland's exit from the federal government has been a long time coming. I think it's been clear that she would be leaving the government in the first place, leaving cabinet, then leaving Parliament altogether. That was sort of a very obvious outcome, and we're at a point now where that is happening. I think the Prime Minister was pretty clear today. He didn't, ask her to stay on or encourage her to. That the dynamics of the minority parliament situation didn't seem to be on his mind very much. When we are in an environment in which the majority-minority question is so razor thin, each individual MP, obviously they draw a lot of attention, and there's a lot of interest in the dynamics of how this impacts Parliament. The reality is that this is not an unsafe seat for the Liberals. A by-election will be held. They are almost certain to win it. And so I'm not sure it's going to be the great focus of the coming weeks or months beyond the moment that we're in right now.
It's fair to say, I'm not sure this will be the focus stuff in a month from now, but I think it's also fair that Chrystia Freeland was, I use the term on radio, a main character. She had main character energy for a decade on Parliament Hill. She was a fixture of Canadian politics. So how she's leaving it is also going to be scrutinized no matter what, particularly given how things evolved yesterday.
I would agree on that at that point. I mean, and it's, there's lots of reasons that people will say, I intend to eventually resign, and then slow walk their way out the door. The way that yesterday was handled, though, was so curious to me, Vashi, because you have Volodymyr Zelensky. I can see why he would have announced the appointment. It's his appointment to announce. I can see why he was doing it now on the cusp of this major summit in Paris. But then to have an entire day's worth of criticism after criticism after criticism piling up of Ms. Freeland accepting this job while she was still a sitting MP, with no word from her, no word from the Prime Minister. That didn't fly to me like a carefully coordinated exit for someone who, as you say, has been the main character for a very long time.
A source close to her was telling all of our media outlets basically that she had told the Prime Minister on the 24th of December. It seemed like he was in the air for part of the day yesterday, but then I was hearing they couldn't get a hold of her to figure out. Anyway, that's how it went down. It does, Dan does point to though the sort of razor thin nature of this Parliament right now. The Prime Minister himself acknowledged by-elections, Matt Generu, this one. There also might be one for Bill Blair, should he get the UK High Commissioner job. Jonathan Wilkinson, should he be headed in some capacity to Europe, for example. Then we're hearing from a Conservative MP who says that the Liberals, Kathleen, approached him to cross the floor, and he rejects that prospect. He said, it's important for my constituents to know that I, like others, this is Scott Anderson, have been approached by the Liberals and asked to cross the floor to join them. I have no intention, he writes, of crossing the floor today, tomorrow, or ever. Regardless of what you offer me, it would be a betrayal of my constituents, a betrayal of the office to which I've been elected, and a betrayal of my own personal core beliefs. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, it's an interesting story. I mean, when a story like this comes out, you have to ask yourself why now and who does it benefit, right? And I think there's some other questions you want answered too. Like, we don't hear from Mr. Anderson on things like who approached him, who did he talk to, were they informal or formal questions?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say we asked for an interview today, and that request was denied by the.
Yeah, and that because maybe that story isn't as great. It's great in print, but maybe it's not as great when you actually have to talk about the details. Like, was this a formal conversation? Did you meet with the PM? What was the offer? But what I do recognize about it, it's an interesting timing. 3 weeks out from the Conservative convention, the leadership test that Pierre Poilievre will face, it's good to have a Conservative, a backbencher as it is, come out and say that, no, I'm sticking with the team. Because it also tries to help kind of like, we've all been thinking that there's going to be another floor crosser before the House returns on the 26th. So it, kind of secures, the caucus and being like, it's okay to stay with Poilievre and circle ranks around Poilievre in the lead up to the big convention.
Yeah, two things. It's interesting timing, totally Shakir, given the proximity of the leadership review for Pierre Poilievre, but also because I believe the Prime Minister said to CBC in his year-end interview that he was not recruiting everyone, that the Liberals were not trying to get anyone else to cross over, just that they had been approached. Other ministers intimated that they had been approached by other Conservatives. What does this say to you?
I didn't believe the Liberals when they said they weren't approaching other Conservatives. I mean, when you're one seat away, of course, you're making all kind of overtures. You're probably promising things in people's writings to kind of get them to cross over. So I'm not surprised to hear this. And there's probably other Conservative MPs that might speak out before Pierre's leadership review, talking about the Liberals trying to court them as well. So I think it makes sense to try to bring people over to get the majority. But I think after hearing Mr. Carney speak about by-elections, plural, like you said, Wilkinson, Blair, Freeland, they might actually end up further away from majority, in a couple months' time than they are right now in terms of one seat away. So we'll see how it all plays out. But going into the leadership review, I do think, personally, I don't think Mr. Pierre Poilievre has any threat to his leadership of the party. I think he'll probably pass with overwhelming numbers. And then we'll see what happens moving forward in terms of the dynamics between, Carney trying to court backbencher MPs or MPs generally speaking, and those I think, it's appealing to try to be a part of the Liberal Party when you are a firm member and have core beliefs of the Conservative Party.
Do you think we're in for a slight period of calm, Dan, as far as those floor crossers go? Because Shakir's right. Right before, everyone was like, they're going to, we're just one MP away from a majority. It's happening. It's happening.
No, I still think there'll be another floor crosser. If I had to guess and I had to make a prediction, I do think that they will be successful in securing another floor crosser in the weeks ahead. That was certainly in the air when Michael Maw crossed the floor in December, and I think it remains true. I'm not sure, to Shakir's points, it will have a meaningful impact on Pierre Poilievre's leadership review. I think the membership of that party believes very strongly he represents their views and will probably endorse his continued leadership. What I don't think will be helpful for him is if he carries on, particularly with the weakened number, and then there's a slew of by-elections next summer. You've mentioned, 4 seats that could be up. Maybe there's even more. You have a whole group of by-elections next summer that don't go the Conservative way. It's not going to look very good for Pierre Poilievre, and that's actually an environment, I think, politically, that's to the Liberals' advantage.
I've got about 20 seconds. They all go to you, Steph.
Well, one, that presumes the Conservatives would be competitive in any of those seats. The biggest risk for Mr. Poilievre would be if he lost Edmonton Riverbend, which is Matt Generous, the Conservative seat. The prospect of another floor crosser with Ms. Freeland's resignation in the balance is tricky, right? Because as long as that seat is occupied, if they bring over one more floor crosser, that's the majority. That person is the majority government maker. Maybe that's sexy. Maybe that's something they want. But as soon as there are those vacancies, those numbers get more challenging. And then who knows?
Well, maybe she did say in the coming weeks for a specific reason. Okay, maybe. I got to leave it there. Thanks, everyone. Our front bench, Stephanie Levitz, Kathleen Monk, Dan Moulton, and Shakir Chambers. We're back in a moment. Our coverage of what's unfolded in Venezuela and reaction to it will continue tonight right here on CTV News Channel. I will leave Power Play there. I'm Vashi Kapelos. Thank you so much for watching tonight, and have a wonderful rest of your evening.